Hello, my name is Ed Wyatt, and I'm a Senior Communications Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I graduated from Baylor in 1984 with a degree in journalism and political science, and I served as editor-in-chief of the Lariat in my senior year. But I took a circuitous path to public relations. I went to graduate school at Syracuse University, where I earned an MBA, and then I went to work as a financial reporter in New York City for 7 years at the Dow Jones News Service and Barron's Magazine. Then I moved to the New York Times, where I remained as a reporter for 20 years. I worked for the Times in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., covering a wide variety of beats, including business and finance, education, the rebuilding of the World Trade Center site after 9/11, and the publishing business. In Los Angeles, I covered the television industry, and in Washington, I covered telecommunications, antitrust, and regulatory policy. I also was fortunate enough to cover the Tour de France and professional cycling for 3 years. After 20 years at the Times, I decided to look for something new for a couple of reasons. One is I had a daughter approaching college age and I needed a boost in salary to pay tuition, and another one coming behind that who also would be going to college. But I was also dismayed by the role the internet had forged in daily journalism, turning even the New York Times into what is essentially a wire service, where I would often file 4 or 5 versions of an article a day because of the constant need of the internet for updating copy. After leaving journalism, I joined a public affairs agency where I put together strategic communications plans for companies, trade associations, foreign governments, and others who needed help with their presence in Washington. After 3 years of that, I had an opportunity to join the U.S. program of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, working again on strategic communications and media relations on our education and economic mobility programs. I also managed media grants, which we made to media organizations who we wanted to have greater capacity to cover issues in education, not necessarily our own programs, but education in general, and how schools were faring and closing the achievement gaps between white students and students of color. And we also have programs in helping publications tell stories about how people living in poverty end up there, who to blame for poverty, who's responsible for addressing it, and what, if anything, should be done to address it. One program of grants in that vein that we did looked at how to change public understanding around poverty. Over the past few years, the Gates Foundation has spearheaded a multi-pronged, multi-organization initiative to better understand existing narratives around poverty and develop new narratives capable of shifting attitudes and building support for anti-poverty policies. We issued a call for ideas asking people and organizations to tell us how they would change the narrative around poverty. And to do so, we faced a challenge, a big challenge. How would we attract people who were storytellers, who could use narratives around the lived experience of people in poverty to demonstrate that they don't usually fit the stereotypes that we think of when we consider people living below the poverty line? What we looked for in those grant applications were unique voices who could communicate the larger message about economic mobility and what it takes to survive when you're living paycheck to paycheck. We wanted projects that used the lived experience of people experiencing poverty in a unique way, communicating through video, podcasts, public discussion, and other means. We faced a unique challenge in how to reach the people who we wanted to apply for this program. Instead of just trying to get the usual media outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post to write about our effort, we targeted publications that we thought would have an audience of storytellers. Publications like The Hollywood Reporter and Vox, Fast Company, and Wired. Ones that we knew drew creative people who might have unique contributions to make. We also produced a series of 30-second videos featuring people who worked with those in poverty and used them as part of a paid advertising campaign to try to attract submissions that resonated with certain communities. I want to show you a couple of those videos now. They're very short, and they feature people who organize or help organize workers to push for better pay and working conditions. Notice how in a 30-second ad, these people get across the trials that low-wage workers face, the need for people to tell their story, and drive the changing of the narratives that we hear about people living in poverty.
The life of a low-wage worker is a life of struggle, hustle, and stress. Incredible amounts of stress. So much of America is really struggling, if not in poverty, then just above it. We need storytellers who will partner with those in poverty, who will recognize the value, the intelligence, the skills, the thoughtfulness of those in poverty, and the need for them to actually drive narrative shift in this country.
The idea that I grew up with was that if you work and you work hard, you'll be okay. That was the social bargain. Now, it doesn't work. We have to think about how we pool our creativity and intelligence and aspirations together to make real change. It's got to start somewhere, and it should start with you.
So as a result of those outreach efforts, we received 1,225 submissions of project proposals. We were only able to award 28 grants of $100,000 each to create projects that help to further the public understanding of poverty and the people who experience it. And now we're in the process of working with those grantees to refine their projects and produce them. And I want to say a little bit about how managing those grants and that process involves so much more than just giving the organizations some money and telling them to go do their thing. We sponsored a 3-day workshop with all the grantees to get them to understand how narrative works, who their audience might be, and what the characteristics of those audiences were and how to reach them. Following that, we are now conducting monthly seminars to help them work together and share ideas on how to develop their projects. It's a very hands-on process where we work on everything from budgeting to how to attract media interest in your project. I've been very fortunate to work at the Gates Foundation and have the ability to give away money to help organizations that work with people in need. And I hope that you have the same opportunity in some of your career pursuits. I want to leave you with a few tips and ideas that I think helped me along the way. The first one is don't settle and dream big. I think that I never would have gotten to the New York Times if I had followed the path that I originally had contemplated of starting my journalism career in a small city with the hopes of moving up in a few years to Houston or Dallas. If you want an idea where you want to go, and where I wanted to go was New York, take a step in that direction, even if you can't exactly see where the path will lead. My second tip for you is to be curious and be aggressive. At the New York Times, I loved learning about new topics, diving into them and reading everything I could get my hands on, and then writing about them. When I had my first child, I developed an interest in where she was going to school, and so I took an opening as an education reporter. After 9/11, I secured a spot covering the rebuilding of the World Trade Center site because I was the only one who was willing to attend an 8 a.m. meeting of the governing board that oversaw the site. I'm a cyclist, and so in my spare time I proposed and wrote articles about professional cycling for the sports section. After a few years of doing that, the sports editors started coming to me to ask for articles on cycling. And a couple of years later, they asked me to travel to and cover the Tour de France, which I did for 3 years. Another tip I would offer is that everyone deserves representation. Lawyers believe it. I think public relations professionals should too. It can result in some uncomfortable moments, particularly when you work for an agency where you can't control what new client walks through the door. I represented the government of Saudi Arabia in opposing a bill in Congress that was supported by the families of 9/11 victims. I didn't believe that the Saudis were right in their opposition, but I faithfully told their story to journalists and represented their interests. Likewise, when I was representing the government of Ethiopia, my name and home address was published in papers that circulate among the Ethiopian diaspora in Washington, D.C., and at times I honestly feared for my safety. Anti-regime demonstrators convened outside our office, objecting to our work with the Ethiopian government, but I was being paid to tell their story, and so that's what I did. Finally, I would say, don't be in it just for the money. Public relations can be a lucrative field, but if you don't enjoy what you're doing, it ultimately won't be worth it. Do something that makes you feel like you're making a difference in the world. Never stop trying to learn new things and meet new people, because relationships are where you will get your best ideas, your best clients, and future job opportunities. Thank you for listening and best of luck in your ventures. If you'd like to contact me, you can reach me by email at edwyattdc@gmail.com. Thank you and go Bears.